Trevor Tough, Outback Grave Markers, joins us in the studio. How are you going, Trev?
Good, thanks, Jenny.
Good to have you back. You've been out in the country again. Well, of course you are.
I always seem to be doing that.
Yeah. Well, that's what you're about. Where have you been this time?
I went up to the Nambung Country Music Festival last weekend. Fabulous.
Was it?
Really, really good, yeah.
Bands from all over WA?
All over WA. No Eastern Staters this time for the first time. They couldn't get here. Really good, really good.
Tell us about it. Was it a weekender that people camped?
It's 4 days.
4?
We only went up on Saturday and came back Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And some really, really good musicians there. And our son-in-law, Lee Forster, who wrote the music for our Outback Grave song, he was one of the mainstays there, backing everyone else and singing. It was really good.
So there was a stage set up. You said about 1,400 people were there.
Yeah,
and did they camp
caravans,
out, did they?
600 caravans, yes.
Oh, wow.
Amazing, yeah, really good.
So you got to speak to a few people, and there was a band you said that were brilliant, an Aboriginal group.
Yeah, there's a group from Geraldton called Red Ochre. And
name.
we thought, see how these go. Wow, they were really good. They were slick, played the crowd, and the music was fantastic.
And you got to chat to them about a few people, didn't you?
I did, yeah. And I'm sending them one of our stories and hope that they'll use it as a basis for a song that they'll write.
Really? Oh, that's interesting. Tell us about the person, the one that used to sell Sly alcohol or something.
No, that's another one. Lee Forster's looking at... Paul Prickett's looking at writing the words to that.
Oh, right,
and that's about Mother O'Neill, who came across with a horse and cart and was carting and selling Sly grog at the Kimberley
She saw an
Goldfields.
Opportunity.
She did, yes. Yeah.
And you were living up that way, were you not? You bumped into a fellow worker from one of the stations?
I lived in the Kimberley for 38 years, and one of the bush poets is Keith Lethbridge, and he was working at Kimberley Research Station back in the late 1960s when I was there, and he was cutting sugarcane on the sugarcane trials, and I was riding horses and mustering cattle on beef research. So.
Well, so close, you guys up there, and women, you know each other's business and the history,
we were
don't you?
glad to have a chat.
That's
after
great.
50-something years.
Do you really like coming back to the city?
No.
That's what I was wondering, to be honest with you. Now, let's have a quick update. Niagara Cemetery. Peter Waltham looked at me rather quizzically when I said that. And I said, well, is it close to Cossack or somewhere?
No, Niagara's near Kukaini.
Kukaini,
in the Shire of Menzies.
Yeah.
And we've just finished making all the plaques for there. I think there's about 86 we've made for there.
That's a lot.
And we'll be going up there in a couple of weeks to place those plaques. And I'll tell you a few stories from those graves today. And we'll also be going to Lawless, which is just next to Agnew.
Yeah.
And there's 168 or 9 there that we'll be marking as well. I think
have
we've
you done the
9
plaques for that? Oh, you've done 9.
Yeah, we've made all the plaques. Yeah.
You have?
So we've got 250 odd plaques to put up.
And just to reiterate the fact that you do make these plaques, you've got quite a workshop set up, haven't you?
Yes, I've got a workshop at home, and also we've got Westcare making some plaques for us as well in their factory in Bassendean.
And to those that haven't heard your stories before, which we're about to share with you, you actually have a research team, basically. When you've got an unmarked grave, how do you start knowing who is there?
I give it to the research team.
They look at records, birth records.
They look at all the records, birth
for the local council.
And from burial records from the councils.
Okay.
And they get into police day books and all sorts of stuff. Amazing.
How do you know which grave is marked with that person's in that one and who's in that one?
Sometimes we don't, and some of the records are very good. Sandstone know exactly who's in which plot. And there's 146 we're starting on in there, but there's only less than 10 have headstones. Mm-hmm. But we'll be able to place them correctly. Lawless is pretty good. There's a little bit of mix-up on some of them that we'll have to try and sort out. But if we don't know who's in which, we put engrave on the top of the plaque, near here lies.
Okay, that makes sense.
And we put them in rows, sort of like a Commonwealth War Cemetery, and in date order.
You do an incredible job, you honestly do. So you've topped 1,000 plaques.
Yes, just this week we've made 1,000 plaques.
That is good on you for that. Not a bad effort since, 2015?
Yeah.
with a bunch of volunteers.
Bunch of old blokes.
A bunch of old blokes. And a few women, I think, are helping out
And
too.
our research team is just amazing.
Good on them. They're probably enjoying every second of it as well.
They do.
Okay, Daisy Flycatcher.
Right, last time your listeners might remember I told a story about a little girl who climbed on a chair when her mother went out of the room, and she climbed on a chair to get to a daisy flycatcher and sadly died from the poison when she sucked on it or chewed on it. And at the time I told you the story, we didn't know who her parents were, their names, but our researchers have worked their magic again. And so I thought I'd let you know that the parents of little Amy Christina Rowe were Elizabeth Rosina Rowe and Edward Heesam Rowe. And there were 12 children born to this couple between 1905 and 1924. So they had big families in those days, and they had been married in Mount Magnet in 1904.
Imagine their life during those years.
Yes, and
tough.
The beauty of us recording all this information on a database is that we can update it and just add this information as it comes in.
And of course we benefit because we're hearing about the history that we've never known before.
Yeah, and it's all there on the website. Anyone can.
I'm always in awe of people that were actually living out in those conditions. I mean, they didn't have what we've got today. I get that, but we had a bit more comfort.
It was hard going.
Very hard, and to have 12 children to look after as well. That's incredible. Okay, so dynamite poisoning.
Yes, well, this is a story about how being a miner was pretty risky and a dangerous occupation. In February 1900, 3 men died at the Cosmopolitan mine from acute inflammation of the lungs or dynamite poisoning. And it seems they were sent down into the mine too soon after the last explosions, and the air had not cleared sufficiently for it to be safe for them. And they had all 3 had worked on the Hopes Hill mine at Southern Cross, and when that closed, they moved to the Cosmopolitan mine at Kukaini. And apparently they started work there on the 4th of February, and this incident occurred on the very next day, the 5th of February. And the story also reveals that many men in those days assumed an alias, which makes it hard for our research people to track them down. And perhaps they were lying low, or they were running away from their family or police or debt. But in a report from the Kukaini police station, Constable Cromlin reports the deaths of Frederick Fenwick, alias Peacock, Joseph William McKelvey, alias Jackson, and John Burke, alias Muttony Burke.
Is that the same man?
So,
is that the same person with all those aliases?
No, three men.
Different.
Each of the 3 had
an alias.
And John Burke was also known as Muttony Burke, and I think that was probably more of a nickname. And he died from acute inflammation of the lungs and dynamite poisoning on the 5th of February 1900, aged 35. And he was the son of Bridget and John Burke. Joseph William McKelvey, also known, or he was buried as Joseph Jackson, and he died in the same incident on the same day, aged 31 years. And he had been born in Canada in the late 1860s to Alexander and Anne McKelvey. It's unlikely he would have taken the alias of Jackson, and I think that was just a mistake because no one knew him well. And all 3 men were new at the Cosmopolitan mine, and no one really knew him. In his brother's words, they were all just strangers, and by some mistake he was buried as Joseph Jackson, although he had letters and papers to show who he was. His brother wrote to the Registrar General asking him to change the incorrect name on the death certificate to McKelvey, but was told that the name Jackson could not be changed on any account. This error in recording his name at death allowed his union to refuse to pay out on his death, claiming that they did not have a member called Joseph William Jackson. Joseph McKelvey's brother wrote a letter to the mining union in January 1901 demanding their reason why the union refused to pay out the £50 death cover, as he had joined the union when he worked at the Hopes Hill mine in Southern Cross. The tone of his letter is just soaked with emotion and desperation. You can just see how upset the family were.
Of course.
In response, Mr. F.C. Gilbert, the General Secretary of the AWA Union, advised that, and I quote, "As soon as the Southern Cross branch of the union endorses the claim, the money will be paid over to his nearest relative. However, the Southern Cross branch do not consider that sufficient proof has been adduced to warrant them paying over the money.
That's awful.
That's pretty awful, isn't it?
Pretty horrible.
Yeah.
That's what happened. They could get away with it, it seemed.
Now, the third fellow was Frederick Peacock, who was also known as Frederick Fenwick. And like his two fellow miners, he suffered from the dynamite poisoning, but he lingered on for another day, dying on the 6th of February. Well, we've made plaques for these three, and we'll be placing them at Niagara Cemetery in early November. And incidentally, a fourth man named Llewellyn also suffered in this same incident, but apparently survived.
They were very brave men going down into those mines.
A lot of people died in mining accidents.
Of course they would have, because they were after employment, obviously.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, what about George, Anne and Henry Hartley?
Well, we were talking earlier about it was hard going having children and raising a family back in the 1890s and early 1900s, and it was full of risk. But spare a bit of thought for this family we've come across. George Hartley was a miner, and with his wife he lived for some years at Niagara Goldfields. His wife's name was Kathleen Elizabeth Hartley. And on the 20th of January 1904, Elizabeth gave birth to a little boy they named George after his father. Sadly, he only survived 2 days, and the death certificate showed that he suffered from obstruction of the bowels. 3 years later, in September 1907, Kathleen and George had a baby girl they named Anne. Little Anne died at 3 weeks of age on the 13th of October 1907, with the death certificate showing she suffered imperfect rectum iliac colotomy. Then a few years later, on Christmas Day, the 25th of December 1910, their third child, Henry, died at only 3 days old from obstruction of the bowel.
Goodness.
These days, probably all those babies would be saved, but 100 years ago, there was nothing that could be done. So perhaps there are some congenital causes, but thinking of the family, there was no counselling or support for them in those days.
Now, that seems like a genetic condition, doesn't it? And the thing is, what sort of medical support was there out in these places? Zero.
Virtually nothing.
So what about? For them to analyse why they died, who would be doing that?
There'd be doctors. There would have been a doctor there, but he wouldn't have had any facilities at all.
So there's no doctor to attend at any time if someone got ill.
That's it. If you got sick, you died.
That's horrible. So the O'Neill family.
Well, we just made 10 plaques for 2 little cemeteries at Corralocking in the Shire of Walcatcham. And amongst the stories are 4 members of one family, so I thought I'd let you know a little bit about this family.
Yeah.
And the first was Charles O'Neill, and he was a farmer and had been a miner who was born in County Kerry in Ireland. He'd come to Western Australia and took up land near Corralocking in the Shire of Walcatcham, and his death at the age of 59 was no surprise, as he suffered from miner's complaint or silicosis of the lungs. He passed away on the 21st of December 1911. But only a month before his death, it seems his brother William O'Neill, also from County Kerry, arrived at Corralocking with his wife Ellen to take up farming. William lived on to the age of 71 when he died of cardiac failure and bladder cancer on the 13th of July 1926.
That was a good age.
His wife Ellen O'Neill died about 3 years later on the 3rd of November 1929, aged 72, having suffered a heart attack or heart failure following an accident where she was thrown from a truck.
They lived to a good age, though.
Yes,
back then.
They did quite well, yeah. But 3 days after she died, one of her sons, James Alexander O'Neill, aged 29, died from heart failure and pulmonary tuberculosis. So we'll be marking those graves in a couple of weeks' time. But there's 4 graves of one family out of 10 in the Corralocking
close
cemetery.
to each other. That's amazing. So, otherwise we would never have known about these people.
That's right.
If you weren't doing this.
And funnily enough, we got onto the Shire. We had some of our people went out to have a look. And these cemeteries are very overgrown. So we got onto the Shire and asked them to clean it
Step
up a bit so that we could actually mark the grave.
Well,
and they sent a message back asking if we could give them a map how to get there. So the cemeteries were well and truly forgotten.
That's not right. Now you've sort of tweaked their memories, haven't you? That is fantastic. Now, who have we got? We've got Samuel Ewer.
Yeah, he was a prospector and miner. And on the 25th of April 1932, he was entombed in a mine cave-in at the Arroyo mine near Sandstone. So he was down there. He wasn't killed in the fall, but he was locked in.
Yeah.
And rescuers came close to digging him out, but further rockfalls put their lives in danger and they had to be taken out. But they got within a metre of him and they could hear him breathing.
Oh, gosh.
And they had to leave him. And subsequently, 3 miners, Jack Tatlow, Billy Pearce and Jimmy Byers, received a Royal Humane Society medal for their acts of courage in trying to get him out. And the mine is now an open-cut mine, and Sam Ewer's body was revealed in 1995 when they did the open cut. And he's been reburied in the Sandstone Cemetery, and his grave has a small marble headstone memorial there. So we're about to start making plaques for all the 144 graves in this cemetery, and currently less than 10 have any identifying headstones. But when we've finished the whole story of Sandstone, it'll be there for all to see. Yeah.
Good on you, Trev. We'll take a break, come back shortly. Trevor, we have got yet another person's grave that you have acknowledged. James?
Yes. Kerguelen Robinson. And he got his name Kerguelen quite in a different manner. James was born on the 11th of March 1859 on board of a sealing ship. A
sailing ship?
No, a sealing ship.
Oh.
Went killing seals, hunting seals for their fur.
But it was a misprint, okay.
And the ship was called the Offley. And he was born in the Gulf of Morbihan, which was known as Royal Sound in those days, and the Kerguelen Island. He was the first and only Britisher to be born on Kerguelen Island in the Southern Ocean. His parents were Jane Parson Robinson and James William Robinson, who was a master mariner. He was obviously the captain of the ship. And they gave him the name Kerguelen after the place he was born. And these islands are an overseas territory of France, but their far-off location in the Southern Ocean places them far closer to Antarctica than to mainland Europe. In fact, the islands are so remote and the landscape so harsh that they've also been called the Desolation Islands. So some place to have a baby, hey? And on the 10th of December, 1889, James married Alice Maud Wakefield in Hobart. And by late February in 1914, he was working on the Brilliant mine near Lawless, close to Agnew, in the Shire of Leonora, when he became bushed and lost. It was the hottest time of the year, and the poor man died from thirst. He was reported missing from Lawless, and subsequently Police Constable Daniel Buckley's search party found the deceased in the bush about 11 miles from Brilliant Mine. He's buried 8.5 miles northeast of Agnew, which is a bit of a challenge for us because that can be a pretty big patch, but we'll find him, or we'll do our best to find him.
How do you find them? You've got a compass?
You get out there on the ground and you walk around and find him. Yeah.
Good on you.
And he left a wife and a family in Carlton in Victoria, so there was another family damaged by the mining.
What about their descendants? Has anyone ever sort of found out that you have marked their graves?
Oh, yes, we do. In fact, there was a lady at Nambung Country Music Festival. Her and her husband run the gate, and she spoke to me last year when we went about a great auntie who was buried at Old River Cemetery. And so I drew them a bit of a mud map how to find it, because it's otherwise you'd never know it was there. And anyway, her son went up and put flowers on the grave and took a whole bunch of photos today, and she gave us some more family information. So it was really good.
That is so satisfying for families, the descendants, I mean.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So was that particular grave in a township, or was it out
No, it's out on the Old River Station.
Oh, right.
There's about 16 graves there, I think. We've marked all
That
those.
is very exciting to have
and
that.
she also tied in another one that we did at Menzies just recently. This lady had a younger sister who only survived 3 days, born in Menzies, and so we're able to link those together. So it's really good information.
Is there a website people can? I think I've asked you before for people to go and see what sites you're finding. They may recognise some of them.
It's all on our website.
Outback Graves.
Yeah, and they can look up alphabetically.
Yeah, gosh,
And
it's
see if it
worthwhile,
might
isn't
be,
it?
yeah.
If they've never really found out what the forebears did. Now, what is this person? Sataro Murahata?
Yeah, that's the one. And we got this story from page 3 of the Black Range Courier and Sandstone Observer on Saturday, the 16th of March, 1907. And they tell this story, and it just sort of tickled my fancy. I thought it was a good one to finish with. And it says that on Saturday evening last, a frightful tragedy occurred at Messrs. Knott and Connor's stockyards, some 4 or 5 miles south of Nungara. And it's the story of a Japanese gardener named Sataro Murahata, who was residing in the neighbourhood, and he was attacked by a boar and so terribly injured that he bled to death in a few minutes. It seems that Sataro Murahata was in Nungara on Saturday, and on returning home after completing his usual round of business, he visited the pig yard where William Ketterer is employed as a caretaker. At the time, the Japanese was under the influence of liquor, so you can see what his business was in the town. And apparently Ketterer warned him not to go into the yard as the boar was in a bad mood. But the warning was disregarded, and out of bravado, Sataro Murahata went into the yard when the boar immediately attacked him savagely, knocking him down and inflicting such injuries, including the severing of the femoral artery, that the victim was dead almost before Ketterer realised what had occurred. Although physically weak, Ketterer entered the yard and dragged the Japanese out. Finding that he was dead or dying, he lost no time in coming into town and acquainting his employers and Constable MacArthur with what had occurred. The latter, with Mr. Knott and others, at once proceeded to the yards, where they found the Japanese dead. Dr. Keenan subsequently examined the body and found that death was due to loss of blood, the femoral artery having been severed. An inquest was not considered necessary. So there you go. Don't go drinking and playing with pork.
Incredible how they wrote stories about all this too.
It's really good. Yeah. I love the language of the day.
Yes, you're not kidding. That's absolutely gorgeous. Fabulous. They can go to, where do they go? Lee Forster? No. What's their website?
Outbackgraves.org. www.outbackgraves.org.
I've got that there. Fantastic. Thank you very much, and I'm going to play your song for you.
Oh, fabulous.
Okay,
Thanks,
here it is, Outback Graves.